Welcome to the RE Podcast, the first dedicated RE podcast for students and teachers. My name is Louisa Jane Smith, and this is the RE Podcast, the podcast for those of you who think RE is boring, which it is, and I'll prove it to you. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Shuaib Khan to the RE Podcast. His blog, Shuaib Writes Khan Thinks, talks about equality, and his podcast, Anti-Small Talk, interviews all people about all things about equality. And I'm absolutely delighted to have you, Shuaib. Welcome to the RE Podcast.
Hello, Louisa, and thank you for inviting me. I think it's going to be a very insightful conversation, and we've got a lot to say, haven't we?
I think we're going to be here a while. I mean, before we start, can you just tell me a little bit about who Shuaib Khan actually is?
That's a question I ask myself every single morning. I think we're in constant self-discovery, really. I'm a 28-year-old RE teacher from here in Peterborough. I'm in my 5th year of teaching. What I don't have in pedagogical experience, I've got in lived experience. I've got a very, very lived experience of growing up in a multi-generation household, even till this very day. I was very, very much raised by my grandparents, who had a massive part of my upbringing. And I think equality hurts, and we need to be having those conversations about it. And RE, alongside my second subject, sociology, they allow me to have these conversations with my students in the classroom. Very, very empowering. It is the best subject in the world. We've got to plug it as much as possible. At a time where religion is so misunderstood, now it's really important we plug in those gaps and with misconceptions. So, yeah, that's pretty much me.
Absolutely. I think that's what we have in common is we both teach RE and sociology. And we have the honour of having conversations about equality on a daily basis. So why is it that you believe in equality? What is it that motivates your passion about it?
I think a lot of it comes from a very, very early age. So as soon as I started school, I was always told that because I had the language barrier to start with, then it was the free school meal barrier, then it was the SEN barrier because I was diagnosed with ADHD at a very, very early age. And all these small barriers continued to stop me from reaching my maximum potential. And it got to a stage where I was struggling to understand, how can the world be so unequal? Why is there not a sense of everyone having a seat at the table? And that's carried on right throughout my life. I've seen that in job interviews. I've seen that as I've gone to university. It's been a continuous feeling and a continuous life experience that I've had. I think equality within itself is very misunderstood. I think people refer to equality as everyone being treated the same. I don't think that's necessarily the case. It's more about being given similar opportunities and given equal opportunities to succeed. And I like to think, if there was a race with my power dynamics of my life, being from a BAME background, being diagnosed with ADHD at a very young age, free school meal, I like to think if we started a race with every other child at the same age as me, I would be quite a few steps behind. I was always trying to catch up. And now I find myself in 12, 13 years on from leaving school, I find myself in a position of privilege and people are willing to listen to me and hold conversations with me. And these experiences that I had, they can't exist any further than they already have. It's gone on far too long. There's got to be an opportunity to look at the dynamics of class, age, gender, ethnicity, all the intersexual dynamics together and tackle them appropriately. It's unacceptable to think that we're the 5th, 6th richest country in the world. Promise not to get political as well. We are the 5th, 6th richest country in the world, and there's such a chasm between the haves and have-nots. And I was a part of the have-nots for a very, very long time. And now I feel as though I'm in a position where I can talk about it, and I feel brave enough to talk about it because the trauma of it existed for so long. So the passion in equality really comes from a very, very young age, sharing one bowl of cereal between 3 brothers, fighting over whatever's left of food, going to food banks, the experience of charity shops, not being able to go to proms. The trauma of that is massive. And I think when you see people like Marcus Rashford using their platforms and shedding light on the experiences of others, I'm not saying I'm Marcus, he's doing incredible things, but I'm trying to do what I can at the chalk face, the very front of those classrooms, changing people's perceptions of Muslims and Muslim males in particular, and trying to keep it really honest. That's the most important thing, Authenticity, I was told at a very early age, people don't buy into the truth too much, but it's nice to be around people now that are starting to understand that authenticity really matters. And it's hard. It's hard in a world that's very saturated with multiple different personalities, and people are quick to jump on bandwagons. You probably remember the Black Lives Matter movement last year. My name kind of come out of that. I remember I was reading loads about it and I was doing my research about it and I wrote a couple of blogs and they got loads of hits and everything. I think since that moment I realised that life experience is everything. That I might not be the most pedagogical read, as I said before. I might not have the hugest platform in the world, but whilst people are struggling, in a similar position to myself at one stage, We are going to keep trying to support them the best that we can. If they haven't got a voice, we provide them a voice. I was very lucky growing up. I was able to articulate myself as best that I could. But now there's other people's stories out there that deserve to be shed light on. And there's people struggling. The world's on its knees. And we've got to be elevating others. And that's what equality is. It's about elevating others, providing them with equal opportunities. And really, seeing humans and children as children. And providing them equal opportunities, access to everything that's available. Resources, time, access, this whole shebang. So really, the passion started off at a very, very early age. I had 4 or 5 years where I tried to get a job, neoliberal sort of idea, I'll get a job and I'll build a career. Activism now is the most important thing in my life, and perhaps even put it ahead of my teaching, Activism is imperative, and whilst people are listening, I'm going to use my platform to support children who look just like me, who never had a voice growing up as such. So it's really important that I can do that. And if I can shed light on taboo experiences, now I've been talking a lot about underachievement of Pakistani British boys. We don't want to talk about that, but I will. I feel as though sometimes when I'm writing something, it has to be me, has to come from me. It's one of the pillars of privilege and platform. And whilst I've got it, I'm going to try and use it the best that I can.
And you're doing it brilliantly.
Thank you.
It's so exciting and so beautiful, the work that you're doing. What are you aiming for? When will you know that the inequalities have ended? I mean, you mentioned sort of those cage factors, the class, the age, gender, ethnicity. It's beyond that. It's sexuality, it's ability, it's disability. What world are you waiting for? What world are you aiming for? When will you know that inequalities have ended?
A sense of equality will exist for me when we can walk into a room at a canteen and everybody, regardless of colour, age, ethnicity, religion, whatever, is sat there openly mingling. That's the world I want to see, where there's no division between rich or poor. There's no division between different ages, where we accept people for what they are. And I think the pandemic has exposed that massively for me. And I've been very vocal in how it's been handled as well. The classism is stark, it's unbelievable, it's so open and apparent in front of us. The chasm between people who are clinically vulnerable, underlying health conditions, and people who are fit, able-bodied, the division between people who are straight and who have alternative sexual preferences and sexuality. So I speak to people from the LGBTQ plus movement and they don't have any voice at all. I'm looking for a place of unity. That's what I'm looking for. I know maybe in my lifetime I might not see it, but I will put the inroads so that children beyond in the future will see it. So it's all about leaving that legacy and that inclusive legacy. We're trying to undo thousands of years of pain and trauma and segregation and inequality, and that's not going to be done overnight. We have to be patient, and maybe we might not be the beneficiaries of it. So my vision for the future is that we live in a world where everyone accepts one another, and it might be holistic, it might be wishy-washy, but one of my biggest heroes, Malcolm X, towards the end of his life, that's exactly what he spoke about, this idea that we will meet somewhere in a field of unity. And if we can do that and invite more and more people into the conversation and make them feel welcome, that's what's really important. So we talk about things like white privilege, for example. I'm not here to call you out on your white privilege. That's not who I am. I'm in no position to do that. My job is to provide you with a lived experience and signpost you to resources and conversations and dialogues that will support you in understanding your position so you can one day support me and children like me in school as well. It's all about that unity, and that's what I'm looking for. And it's holistic. It is very holistic, People ask me, what camp do you sit in? Are you anti-racist? Are you this? Are you that? I'm really nothing. I'm just me. And, I think it's really important for me just to be myself. And that's the future I want to see, that I just want to see everyone just get along with one another and for there not to be this division all the time. And us to pick our battles carefully. Now, I'm not being funny. I haven't got time for traditional progressive arguments in education. I'm sorry. Haven't got time for that. That's not on my resume. That doesn't excite me. But I have got issues with teacher well-being. Absolutely. I've got my concerns with inclusivity in the curriculum. Absolutely. Have I got issues with unsafely opening schools? Absolutely. So we tackle one house at a time. Loads of houses are on fire, but the one that's got the biggest fire, we take that out bit by bit, and we use our position to advocate equality for everyone or equality for no one. That's how I look at it. So yeah, the world that I'm looking for is an inclusive world where we can all just get along and there's nothing dividing us at all, really, and we can just be ourselves. That's what we strive our children to be, Hopefully we can have that in the future someday.
I love that. I mean, there's so many things I want to pick up on what you've said. I know there's going to be lots of people listening, nodding along to what you're saying. But first of all, I mean, you talked about sort of history. Where do inequalities come from? What has caused them? Why are we in the situation that we're in now?
I think the current situation we're in right now is because of silence. A lot of it is because the complicitness of us. I think particularly here in Britain, we've got a real illiteracy towards inequality as well. I talk about grief illiteracy a lot, where we haven't got the emotional competence to look at people, ask them if they're struggling and try and support them. It's very much transactional. Community doesn't exist as it used to. I live in the BAME community. It's not what it used to be 10 years ago. And when I was growing up, when I was a very young boy 20 years ago, everyone's very much focused on trying to just cater for their own needs and support themselves. I think these inequalities have not been challenged for so long, and I think they've sat comfortably for a very long time with people, the fact that it is male privilege, I wasn't aware of male privilege till I was at university. It took me, till I was 18, 19 for me to realise that I have got privileges as a male. I can walk through certain parts of town whenever I like. I can dress a certain way. It's making people aware of them, and we weren't allowed to be aware of them. And this is why subjects like RE and sociology are so important. We have to socialise children to realise something is wrong, and it is wrong. At the very core, it's not acceptable that children in this country haven't got laptop provision or access to the internet or even food to eat. Even further, I remember I did a home visit not too long ago with a school that I was working at, and I saw a single parent, a single mother she was, and she's warming up a tin of beans on a heater, and it leaves you astounded, and it makes you wonder more and more that how has this become the norm? And we've got to unnormalize things like poverty. We've got to unnormalize things like inequality, sexism, homophobia, racism, ageism, even grief. We've got to pull out the conversations that were held backstage. We've got to bring them forward. And this is why people in the LGBTQ plus movement are really important in this process as well. They are doing something that needed to be done for a very long time. Now it's all about people who are part of other movements like anti-racism to carry on doing that work. And it's going to take a long time. These are small seeds we're planting for a movement that hopefully see in fruition in many, many years' time. So it's a gradual process, more and more. We can't accept it for what it is. It's almost like being complicit. And I think our acceptance of inequalities has allowed them to persist even more. And also our acceptance of governments, who have continuously thrown bland rhetoric at teachers, about disadvantaged children. I've written about that as well, how that word is being used and misused. I'm not being funny. When I was a child and there was 3 brothers fighting over food, we didn't want a man in a suit to represent us. That's not how it works. We wanted a democracy that provides us representation. We want people who look like us in positions of power and who are willing to support us as well. So these inequalities, they've persisted for a very long time. They've sat there for a very long time, very comfortably. We've got to shake them up. We've got to radically shake that up now. We've got to somehow, in some way, to the work that we're doing in the classrooms, is embed those anti-inequality seeds in these children's minds so they can grow up thinking that, yeah, this is wrong. Or even things like wheelchair access for our disabled students. It should be something that's normalized. It should be something that's there anyway. Or places for people to pray. Myself and yourself are RE teachers. I've been in schools where it's a burden to ask for somewhere to pray. Now, it should be a blessing. You should be able to walk into a school and say, I need somewhere to pray. Here's a prayer room. Off you go. There shouldn't be this dialogue, this conflict. There's other conflicts to deal with. So I think it's about embedding that literacy of inequality into children and get them to understand that, okay, you started the race a bit further back than every other child, but these are the steps we're going to put in place to get you caught up. But once you are caught up, we're going to make sure you have that equality and meritocracy does exist, because teaching, especially the children that I work with, British Pakistani boys, telling them about meritocracy and then knowing they've been stopped and searched by the police at the weekend, or the fact they will apply for hundreds of jobs and not get the role they're looking for. It does make me feel very uncomfortable. It makes me feel as though that I'm setting these children up for failure. So there's got to be visible opportunities for these kids to succeed. And it needs to be embedded in every single institution bit by bit, because inequalities are supported by institutions and structures. Once we start targeting the structures at a very early age, at the very grassroots, we can build it up. I'm talking about governance. I'm talking about stakeholders. I'm even talking about recruitment processes and that entire process. How inclusive are people, or are they willing to be inclusive? So the way I've done it, particularly the work that I do, is the table was never there for me. I've just had to build my own. But I like to think with the table that we're building ourselves, including the ones that we use to work with others, that will just expand and the echo chambers will gradually get broken down and there'll be more and more diversity in opinion. So it really is about that. It's about providing those opportunities, realistic opportunities to hold these conversations.
Can I just pick up on a couple of things? Just for some of our listeners, could you just explain what meritocracy is and why it's relevant to this discussion?
Meritocracy is the idea that everyone can achieve regardless of their abilities. So myself and yourself could be in a classroom and you and I will have the same exam. We'll both have the same opportunity to pass that exam. You won't get additional questions or additional time. We've all got the same opportunities to succeed. So meritocracy is very much this belief, you work hard enough, you will achieve. myself and yourself are sociologists. We know the idea of strain theory, where people are blocked along the way and blocked aspirations. In theory, meritocracy works. In theory, it's absolutely wonderful. Inequalities stop meritocracy being fully fledged and for everyone to accept it for what it is. If you'd asked me 10 years ago, do you believe in meritocracy? I'm like, absolutely. I worked hard, I got to uni, etc., etc. But if you ask me now if I believe in meritocracy, standing in front of those children, teaching them, I'd say for a lot of these kids, it probably won't exist, which is shocking.
So meritocracy is the belief that if you work hard enough, you can achieve what anyone else can. And it doesn't take into consideration that people are disadvantaged. And it doesn't matter how hard they work, they will not be given the same opportunity as everybody else. What would you say to someone who didn't think there was institutional racism?
I think because often we don't call out the things we can't see. That's what I think anyway. We don't call out the things that we can't see. So institutional racism and systemic racism is not something that's so overt. And I wrote about it yesterday, this notion of unconscious bias. It's not deliberate. It's very rarely is it deliberate. Very rarely will someone deliberately go out their way to make it difficult for a BAME person to succeed, etc. It's within the institution in itself. So people who are saying it doesn't exist, you've not felt it. You've not felt the impact of it. It's almost like if you say to me, Shuaib, give me some examples of sexism that you've encountered in the workplace. I haven't got any. Does that mean they don't exist? Absolutely not. They definitely exist. You've had experiences, for example, other people have experiences. So I think it's denial. I think a lot of that is denial. A lot of that is fragility. And that fragility exists very much top down in institutions. People are unwilling to hold accountable things they can't see, and also unwilling to hold accountable personal assumptions they've got. And again, this comes through various different means. It often means that we downplay and trivialize other people's experiences, which is beyond dangerous. I think the current piece that I've been working on is about tone policing and how people are called too emotional or too aggressive, or I will speak to you when you calm down. It's these institutional factors. We have this assumption that someone is going to react a certain way. And if you ask anybody, anyone tells you about if institutional racism exists or not, just look at the Stephen Lawrence case, That's a blaring example of injustice in this country. I'm not talking about George Floyd. I'm not talking about America. I'm talking about here in the UK. A young man was stabbed in 1993. I was 1 year old. I didn't know anything about it. When I got to secondary school, I learnt about the Stephen Lawrence case. Till this very day, we don't have justice for Stephen Lawrence. We don't have justice for Grenfell. Now, this is institutional. This isn't overt. No one's using overt racist language towards these people. Some people do. I'm not saying that doesn't exist, but there is a division between how BAME people are treated in this country and how the white majority of people are treated in this country. That's not saying everyone's racist. I would never say that. If anything, it's saying we need to change the norms and values which operate our society and how we conduct ourselves. So institutional racism, you can't see it. It's very intangible. But the impacts of it on the labour market, the impacts on it with regards to COVID as well, this is very systemic, it's very beneath the roots of trees. And again, we're trying to plant those seeds to make sure, the next set of trees that grow, they are inclusive and children are having conversations that matter. So yeah, if anyone does ask you about institutional racism, just question them about the Stephen Lawrence case and how probably the biggest injustice in British history is still allowed to sit still despite, I'm 28, so 29, nearly 30 years on from Stephen Lawrence's death. So I think that's the most blaring example. And I always provide that example, and God bless Stephen Lawrence and his family.
Absolutely. And what more can we do in schools to tackle the issues of inequality and particularly maybe the role of RE in that?
I think with regards to inequality and tackling inequality in schools, pupil premium doesn't cut the mustard. I'm sorry, it just doesn't. When I was at school, I'm very much the baby of the Tony Blair policies, the whole Sure Start and EMA and etc. You name it, we all rolled out to us. All those opportunities when we were at school. Aim higher, got the chance to visit universities and improve our aspirations. Schools alone can't do it themselves. It needs to be a societal approach. Education cannot compensate for society. And Basil Bernstein talks about that, one of our sociologists' speech codes as well. And I think there's a lot of pressure on schools to be this great equalizer. We need to be working on things like equalizing wages and making sure wages meet the rate of inflation. We need to be having conversations about making sure the rising living cost is also met with the rate of inflation with our wages as well. We've got to make sure that every child has access before they can have any opportunity to education. I've got children in the school that I work in currently who don't have access to internet, don't have opportunities to access the curriculum on a day-to-day basis. So again, it's very much a societal approach. We've got to change how we look at poor people as well. I think that's what Marcus Rashford's legacy is. We've got to consider poverty as a societal issue, not a personal defunct. It is not a personal defunct at all. People fall on hard times at any given time. I speak to people regularly in my community. I actually did a ethnography sort of thing with my blog not too long ago, where I spoke to a single parent who'd gone through a divorce. She was living very happily and very wealthily. She had a massive house and lived in a very affluent suburb. She fell on hard times and now she's relying on food banks. Asking for help should not be considered as something unacceptable or taboo. If anything, we should be promoting asking for help and getting support. And I think with regards to what schools can do, I think we've got to get rid of these token policies as well. I think this idea of marking pupil premium books first, extra stickers, all these fancy things people do, different coloured pens. If I was at school and I was a disadvantaged child and I saw my work with extra feedback, I'd kick off. I'd scream at my teacher, go, what are you doing? I don't want more feedback. Why are you singling me out for praise or for concern? If anything, treat me the same and give me access. Give me a textbook. That's what I would say. So I think it's reducing these token policies as well and bridging that disconnect with politicians. That's what I think. I don't think we've got a very good education secretary. That's just my opinion. That's being very polite. I'm not going to go into logistics of how I personally feel about him or the day-to-day reality, the damage he's caused our education system. We've got such a big divide between politics and the rhetoric in politics and the actual day-to-day logistics of us guys in the classroom at the chalk face. So bridging that disconnect's really, really important. Really for our school leaders to really make sure they're making the right investments. Things like bus passes, that's important. Making sure that children are actually fed and they maybe even open the school slightly early. Holding things like breakfast clubs, It's hard to believe and to understand that a breakfast could be the only meal that child has. I know that very well as a child myself. So we used to double up on breakfast, me and my brother. So we never used to have lunch money. So we'd have breakfast at home, we'd have a bowl of cereal, and we'd go into school and we'd double up. So we'd go and eat a school breakfast. And at lunchtime, we'd just get some water or something. And that was the only thing that got us through the day. And again, it's about having that conversation with those families, making sure there are things like regular pastoral checks, making sure parents are engaging with the remote learning that's available as well. And if they can't access emails, invite them into the schools. Like I remember when we were growing up at parents' evenings, my granddad used to come to parents' evenings with me regularly and he didn't know a word of English. And he used to sit there with a pen and pad. He said, can you write it down for me? So he'd get our neighbour to come and our neighbour would translate from Urdu into English and then back into Urdu so he could understand it. It's that cultural capital, embedding it early, getting families feeling more aspirational, telling children they can do it. It really does start at a very, very, very young age. But in terms of tackling inequality, this is very much a political matter. And the burden that rests on our teachers, it's incredible. And it's very tiring. It's very tiring. I remember when I got my NQT post and the film by Denzel Washington came out, The Equalizer. And I literally felt like the Equalizer walking around that school. And by mid-year, I had worked my finger to the bone because of the deprivation I saw. It's only so many hours in the day. It's only so much you can do as an educator and only so much senior leadership can do. So it's about equalizing funding. It's about providing equality of opportunity. It's about bridging the disconnect between politicians and teachers. I could go on. There's so much that can be done. And really it's about changing people's perceptions of what it means to be deprived. Not everybody's able-bodied, and that's okay. That's okay. Not everybody's wealthy, and that's okay. Not everybody's straight, and that's okay. We've got to have that conversation. We've got to look at the power dynamics and break those power dynamics down. So one day in the future, know that any child from any background can go to Oxford or Cambridge, and there's not that disconnect as well. So I think it is very much a top-down approach where it filters all the way down to teachers and people at the very grassroots level. And obviously, in terms of politics as well, changing the representation of the Houses of Parliament, that's absolutely imperative in my opinion. I think we've got one very good MP. I'm going to mention the name, Zara Sultana. She says it like it is. She calls out inequalities. I'm not sure what the rest of them do. If they're representing the public, they're not doing a very good job at representing our public. And yeah, it's very multi-layered. And I'm sorry if I ranted, but it's very multi-layered, it is.
No, it's lovely to see your passion. There's something I do want to pick up on, and that is the idea of positive discrimination. And from what you're saying, I get a sense that that's not something that you support particularly. Am I right in that?
Thing is, with positive discrimination, it's one of those things like affirmative action. You got it in South Africa, so the whole notion of reverse racism. I understand the idea behind it. I can totally understand that. But let's just say you and I went for a job at a random school, and the head employed you because you were female, and he also employed me because I was BAME, not because of our skills and qualifications. I worked my finger to the bone to those qualifications, so have you. It shouldn't be that we pick out one dynamic and give a person a role based on that power dynamic. In certain areas of society, I think it can be deemed as tokenism. I've been asked to do things like prevent training. Now, I'm a Muslim male. I'm not being funny. I feel very uncomfortable with that. I don't know anybody who's been involved in the prevent situation. I was given the booklet a night before by my deputy head teacher, and he said to me, Shuaib, you're delivering prevent tomorrow. I didn't know what to do. I felt uncomfortable, and I felt reading some of the stuff very uncomfortable. this idea that we're matching it with tokenism, that's dangerous. That's really dangerous. I think once we marry it with tokenism, this positive discrimination, it's almost like it's, Eid or Ramadan's coming up. Oh, we'll let Shuaib do the assembly because he knows a lot about it. I really don't. Why are you making assumptions for? If anything, we've got experienced RE practitioners in the school or experienced practitioners in safeguarding who could do a better job than me. But because I fit the bill or because it ticks a box with them, it's beyond dangerous. So I'm very much against this idea of tick box, affirmative, sort of positive discrimination. It's one of those things where everybody wants to be seen as exclusive, but not actually be exclusive. So we've got to bridge that disconnect as well, haven't we?
I mean, just one thing I do want to pick up just as we close. I've got a last few questions for you. You've mentioned Malcolm X. You've mentioned Denzel Washington. I mean, The Equalizer, but he also played Malcolm X. He's quite a hero of yours. Why him? Why Malcolm X?
So long story short is I was in a class and I was being very silly and I was messing around. I think I was about 8 years old. And the teacher asked me to get out and she kind of like said to me, just read this book. And she just grabbed a random book off the shelf. And it was the autobiography of Malcolm X. I just took it home. I just thought, you know what, I'm going to take it because she sent me out of the class. I'm going to mess around. So I took it home and it just kept staring back at me. And back then there was none of these iPhones and stuff, we were very much, playing Tamagotchi and stuff like that. So I wasn't really into tech. So I just kept reading the book. I got obsessed and it was incredible to see how a man went from being a child who was, whose father was killed to someone who ended up on the streets, selling drugs into prison. And he transformed his life to become Minister Malcolm and he became one of the major leaders of the Nation of Islam. And then he went to Mecca and then he changed his approach entirely. So from being someone who's very anti-white, very much disliked this idea of equality, and he pushed it even further. He reaffirmed his beliefs in society and in people as well. So I think Malcolm X, he sparks a fire in me. And I think every generation needs someone who's vocal about things that matter and things that hurt. I remember when I was at school, we used to do, particularly in history, things like Gandhi, and we were always told that certain elements of history should only have a certain amount of light shone on them. But whenever it came to Malcolm X and we did it in class, I used to just go away and read more and more. And I feel as though I'm learning more and more about the man every single day. Even at university, I was very much desperate to get to know more about his views, his ideas, his upbringing. He's outspoken, he's passionate. And when he's in a room, people listen. And not only that, there's intelligence there. It's not ranting. It's not just pure ranting and blaming people. So I really loved how he changed his message, how he was willing to reflect on his life experiences. And I don't think the world saw enough of him, that. I think he died at a very, very young age. I think he was 37 when he died. He was assassinated. We didn't get to see enough of Malcolm. So the work his daughter does, Ilyas Shabazz, I follow on Instagram and on Twitter as well. She does some incredible work as well. But that generation, that 60s generation, Muhammad Ali, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, people like Sam Cooke, we had a real fusion of authentic BAME or black people who are talking and having conversations about it. For me, it was inspiring because growing up, I didn't have many role models as such. There was not many people in my, everyone just worked. They went home and they worked. No one was vocal on TV. So when I got a chance to read Malcolm X, and even now till this day when I hear his speeches or go through his quotes, it just evokes some sort of real spirit in me and makes me think that the vision that he had, we could have that vision. We can still have that vision now. He's just a very special man. I could talk about him all day long. He's a very, very special individual who inspires people to this very day. And I think in the final part of his autobiography, he actually turns to God, turns to Allah, and he says, all the faults are my own. So even in his final words of his autobiography, he was saying that all the mistakes he's done, they are on him. And he will be judged for those mistakes. Everything you've seen before, you guys can judge, but ultimately God will be his final judge. It's a very special book. A very, very special human being. And I got loads of memorabilia and everything. One day I just can't wait to actually go to America and walk down Malcolm X Boulevard and even go to the ballroom where the assassination happened, understanding more of that history and experience that history more and more. There's so many lessons we can learn from people like that. So everyone has a hero. And for me, it was Malcolm, and, it always will be.
Amazing. You mentioned Sam Cooke there, and that nicely leads me on to a question I want to ask you, because I know that you love music. Yep. I know you're a massive muso. If there was one song that our listeners could listen to when they finish listening to this podcast, what song would it be?
Oh, man. That's a really, really tough question. Thing is, you probably know from my Tiny Voice Tuesday talks with Toria, I listen to 90s music. I listen to everything. So Britpop, Spice Girls. I'm not even ashamed. Kylie Minogue, you name it. I listen to it all. With regards to this podcast, I'd probably listen to Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terrell, Ain't No Mountain Higher. That's a beautiful song. It's actually one of my favourite films as well. Remember the Titans, that is a beautiful song. And
yes.
It's about conquering and finding ways to conquer challenges in life. So that's what we're all doing every single day.
Yeah, absolutely. And overcoming the differences to join together in unity, which is how we started this podcast. So what a lovely way to end. If there's one final message you'd like to leave our listeners with, what would that be?
I think if anybody out there listening to this podcast, especially our RE teachers as well, you guys are doing some incredible work. I think you're trying to change the narratives. That's the most important thing, the misconceptions that exist in society. You're trying to prepare children for one day. Let's say they're in a queue in Sainsbury's, for example, and there's someone with a turban. They know how to approach them. They have this cultural sensitivity to approaching them. Let's say their boss is a Hindu, or they encounter someone on a flight who's wearing a crucifix or a cross. It's the sensitivity that we can embed. It will create more empathy, and empathy will lead to unity. That's the most important thing. So the RE teachers out there, you guys are doing absolutely incredible work, and I just think it's so undervalued and underfunded, and I love going on trips. I love going to visit mosques and synagogues, etc. It's incredible, and you see how taken aback these children are because they're trying to marry and match the traditional with the sort of modern, and that's what religions are doing. They're constantly changing and ebb and flow back and forth. So despite how secular society is going, there's always a space for our subjects. There's always a space for RE, always a space for sociology, and it's always a space to have conversations that matter. Now, there's children who arrive into our classrooms and never met a Muslim before. I've taught students and they ask me, "Sir, are you Muslim?" They're like, "Sir, you don't look like a Muslim, you don't act like a Muslim." Like, guys, what does that mean? No. What does that mean? Let's just break that divide down even more, How about we have this conversation and they can ask me things about my upbringing or, how I pray, etc. And I want them to walk away thinking, you know what? It ain't that bad. This religion ain't that bad, or this person ain't that bad. We're challenging misconceptions, that, and that's the most important thing. And even the philosophy side of things, I love doing stuff on like sanctity of life. I like doing stuff on, capital punishment, the whole philosophy, euthanasia and stuff. It's incredible. It's so diverse. It's so topical. For me, it's one of the best subjects. It is the best subject at school. The debates you can have, the discussions that you can have. And if you get a class who are mature enough to have those conversations, and I've got one class in particular, one of my year 9 classes, they are incredible. Like, I can see future philosophers in there. So I think everyone's got that philosophical mindset. They've got those tools. It's about harnessing them. And for our RE teachers, you guys are doing that every single day. And, although we're underfunded, although we're understaffed, we're doing the best that we can. And that's all that matters. And we're trying to improve society in our own way.
And a shout out to Mr. Khan's year 9 class.
Yeah, bless them. Yeah. They're a magical bunch, that lot. Yeah. I've got real high aspirations. They're like a dream class. You walk in and they just want to learn. Books are open when they were at school, by the way. Books are open. They're just really keen. And even our live lessons, they're interesting. Yeah. We talk about a lot of things. Yeah.
I love it. We've got such a great job. It's a privilege to do it. Shuaib, we could talk forever, but I'm going to bring it to a close now. And I just want to thank you so much for your time, so much for being such a delightful guest on the RE podcast.
No, thank you so much, Louisa, for inviting me. One day, you and I, it will be RE podcast, Anti-Small Talk, are going to collab again someday in the future.
Oh, I look forward to it. I'll hold you to that as well.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care. Bye. My name is Louisa Jane Smith, and this is the RE podcast, the podcast for those of you who think RE is boring, which it is. We just proved it. But thank you so much for listening to us bore the life out of you.